Welcome to all the delegates who have joined the All-Fashion Sourcing webinar in partnership with USA Trade Hub discussing AGOA. I would like to introduce Cosmas Mahumzi, the Portfolio Manager, Botswana, Namibia, Malawi, USA Trade Hub, who will kick off the webinar and do the formal introductions. Over to you, Cosmas.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cosmas Mamunze. As introduced by Neil, I'm the Portfolio Manager at USAID Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub, USAID Trade Hub, responsible for Botswana, Malawi, and Namibia. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on importing textiles and apparels into the United States. So just a bit about USAID Trade Hub. We are a regional project funded by US government through USAID Southern Africa. The project covers 8 countries, which include Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, and Zambia. Our main mandate is to promote economic growth in the region. And we are achieving this through, guided by 3 objectives. The first objective is to increase exports from 7 of the 8 countries that I mentioned earlier to South Africa. And the second objective is to boost capital and technology flows from South Africa to the 7 countries. Then the third objective is to increase exports from all the 8 countries to the United States under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. Today's webinar is primarily focusing on the third objective, to promote exports of textiles and apparel to the US under AGOA. Why are we focusing on textiles and apparel? So textiles and apparel sector is a key sector under AGOA. When you look at the sub-Saharan Africa countries that are AGOA eligible, you find that several of these countries, they've got textiles and apparel as a sector. The sector has got great job creation capability, and a lot has been said about the jobs that have been created in such countries as Lesotho, as Eswatini in the region. And the other reason is the US is one of the major apparel consumption markets in the world. The US imports textiles and apparel from more than 150 countries. The US Department of Commerce Office of Textiles and Apparel, or TEXA, as well as the US International Trade Commission, their statistics actually show growth of textiles and apparel from sub-Saharan Africa countries under AGOA. Textile and apparel exports grew from 1 billion in 2017 to 1.4 billion in 2019. However, this is under 2% of the total textiles and apparel impact. It's still minimal. There's the room for growth.
I now introduce you to Marina. She's the country representative, Lesotho USA Trade Hub, who will introduce the various speakers and host the session on behalf of the USAID Trade Hub. Over to you, Marina.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you, Course, for those introductions. And as introduced, my name is Marina Bizabani, a Lesotho country representative for the USA Trade and Investment Hub. Mine is an easy job of moderating discussions this afternoon and maybe morning for those that are in the USA. Let me reiterate that we have a rich panel of speakers on AGOA and importing or exporting products into the US market. We'll be covering legal framework issues, insights on bias in the US, activities of trade promotion service providers in the region, as well as perspectives of the suppliers themselves in the region. I'll go straight to it and introduce our first speaker, Jeanette Forrest. Jeanette is customs law expert with 40 years of experience in the field, including working with the US government in private practice, and also as a consultant to governments and companies in developing countries. Her most recent work has included working with the USA Trade and Investment Hub and companies in the Southern Africa region to determine eligibility for the duty-free treatment available under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. Her other work has been with International Monetary Fund, this is the IMF, drafting modern customs legislation for developing countries. Prior to her consulting business, Jeanette was a senior trade advisor at the USAID. Jeanette, you are welcome to take us on with legal framework issues around AGOA.
I'm going to talk to you about a basic US customs law and how to export to the US using the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and with a specific emphasis on textiles and wearing apparel. This is part of a project to prepare an AGOA toolkit for use by trade promotion agencies and export firms in the region. It's meant to address needs identified in the stakeholder engagements that we carried out during the toolkit development, and to provide an overview of the legal framework for US market entry. First of all, I'll talk about some of the key documents required for entry into the US. The first is the entry summary, which is referred to as the 7501. The next is a bill of lading, which is needed to as evidence to right to make entry. The third is the bond, then the commercial invoice, and the packing list. Here's a copy of the 7501 entry summary form, and you'll see that there's a lot of information that needs to be filled in on the top regarding dates and importing carrier, etc. The important thing to keep in mind is that starting with line 27, the merchandise has to be very specifically described under number 28. And it has to include the HS number from the US tariff schedule, the gross weight, and the net quantity. Usually for textiles and apparel, it will be units. The 32 column is for the entered value, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit, how that's calculated. The 33 is the HTSUS rate, which you determine by looking in the tariff schedule. And the 34 column is the sum of the duty times entered value, which will give you the duties due. This is a copy of the bond. This is important because it's needed to show that the carrier is allowed to enter the goods and that the goods are being delivered to the correct consignee. This bond can be a single transaction bond with a specific date for a shipment, or a continuous bond, which is effective for a period of time. This is the commercial invoice. US Customs does not require a particular format for the invoice, but this is a good example of the kinds of things that they need to know. And once again, you can see that the product description is important, and with the harmonized code. And unit of measure, unit price, and then the total price. And price really refers to the price for export to the US. These are the various steps required. I'll go over all of these: classification, value, country of origin, admissibility, and AGOA eligibility. First is classification. This is very important to determine whether merchandise is admissible, what the rate of duty is, and whether it's eligible for any preference programs, such as GSP or AGOA. If you look on this slide, you'll see that there is a link to the current US harmonized system schedule. And that it's important to go to the current version because it changes frequently during the course of the year. The next is customs rulings, which are also important to look at. They can help you a lot with if you are in doubt about what classification provision to use. And also the final one is an online search tool provided by USITC, the International Trade Commission. Here's an example of a page from the tariff schedule. If you look, the heading and subheading, which is the number up to the 8th digit, is in that first column. The statistical suffix, the next 2 digits, is less important because it does not determine duty rates. Then you start looking at the article description, and you start at the left margin, and you see it's women's or girls' blouses. Then you go down a level and, you go down one level, and this is describing cotton women's blouses, and they would either be certified hand-loomed or other, which is not certified hand-loomed. So you keep going along these levels of indentation to find the final provision for your product. For instance, if this cotton blouse has 36% or more flax, then it would go into this column, 6206-3020, and have a 3.5% rate. However, if it does not have 36% or more flax, it's going to go into the next provision, 6206-3030, and be dutiable at 15.4%. Now, a lot of these items will be eligible for AGOA, but when I get to the discussion of the textile rules of origin, that will make more sense. Some products that are non-textiles will have a capital D in this special column, but that is not used for textiles and wearing apparel. This is an example of how you get into the customs ruling system. And you go to the search box and you can put in a name of a product. You can put in a tariff number that you think might be the right one. And you'll get a list of rulings discussing all of those. Now we're going to get to valuation. The preferred method is transaction value. And this will generally be the invoice price. And it's legally, it's the price paid or payable for export to the United States. But generally that will be invoice price. Some importers, like related parties, cannot use transaction value, and they might have to use a different method. And these are listed below. 95% of entries are done under transaction value, so the others are not going to come up very much. Next topic is origin, country of origin. The US has non-preferential rules of origin, and the basic rule is that a product is the origin of the country where it is manufactured, produced, or grown. It is possible to change that origin if the product moves to a second country and there is a substantial transformation in that second country. Substantial transformation is defined as creating a new article with a different name, character, and use. These non-preferential rules are used for determining whether most favored nation or column 1 duty rates apply, and for marking of the product with country of origin. Every article imported into the US has to be marked with its country of origin. Now I will address the preferential rules of origin, and these are the ones that are used for preference programs such as GSP and AGOA. Generally speaking, and the discussion at the top here is related to non-textile products actually. Generally speaking, you will look at the non-preference rule, which is country of manufacture, production, or growth, plus a minimum value content. and that is usually 35%. And that 35% is determined by adding direct costs of processing and materials produced in the country, the beneficiary country. Direct costs of processing is defined pretty broadly. It can include things like electricity for the factory, staff, certainly all the labor, etc. The sum of these costs of direct costs of processing and materials produced has to be at least 35% of the appraised value of the goods when they enter the US. These are used for, as I said, for generalized system of preferences, non-textile products, and other preference programs. Textiles and wearing apparel have an entirely different set of origin rules, and these appear in Chapter 98 of the tariff schedule. The final issue is determining admissibility. Some goods are prohibited, not allowed to enter the US at all. Excuse me. Many goods are restricted by other government agencies. This includes like the Food and Drug Administration, US Department of Agriculture, Environmental Protection Agency. All of these agencies can have requirements that you have a license or a permit before you bring the goods into the US. And they determine what's needed for the license or permit, but the Customs Service enforces this at the border. Now we'll turn to AGOA. AGOA is basically based on the GSP law. GSP has been around for, I don't know, 50 years or something. And it provides preferential treatment for 3,400 products from 131 beneficiary countries all over the world. AGOA was developed to take this basic program and make it broader for sub-Saharan Africa. For one thing, it adds 1,800 products to the list of GSP eligible. And this includes a lot of import-sensitive products that are not allowed to use GSP. The biggest example of this is textiles and apparel. This is what is required to qualify. The country itself must be eligible. The product must be eligible. The product must be imported directly from sub-Saharan Africa to the US, and it must meet the requirements of the origin rules, which are found in Chapter 98, Subchapter 19. And I'll get into that a little bit later. This is a chart showing which countries of the priority countries we're looking at, which countries are eligible for various textile provisions. All but South Africa are eligible for the special rule for apparel. What this means is South Africa cannot take advantage of the lesser developed country rule. It's not considered a lesser developed country. The next columns are related to provisions for handmade, hand-loomed, folklore, and ethnic printed fabric. And this will give you an idea of when all of these countries became eligible for AGOA in the first place for apparel, and then whether they have eligibility for these other more specific provisions. This will help explain a little bit of that, I think. This is the textile certificate of origin. This is very important. You cannot export wearing apparel to the US and expect AGOA treatment unless you have this form carefully filled out. And some of the things are self-explanatory. The number 4, preference group, that is found by looking at the list below under group. And I'll go to a slide where I'll talk about some of the most common provisions that are used on the certificate of origin. This is just the rest of that form. So these are the most frequently used textile categories. Group 4D, and you can find that on that textile certificate of origin, is for apparel assembled of sub-Saharan African fabric. But AGOA provides a more generous rule, and that is in Group 5E, and apparel can be assembled from fabric of any origin. This is referred to as the third country fabric rule. This can only be used by lesser developed beneficiary countries. So for example, South Africa cannot use this provision. Then we go to handloom, folklore, ethnic fabric. A lot of people try to use this provision, but it's a little, you need to be cautious because this only applies to specific articles that have been certified by the US government. So for each country, there will be a federal registered notice listing exactly what products qualify under this provision. The final is the textile articles, miscellaneous textile articles from all throughout chapters 50 to 60, and then chapter 63. And chapter 63 is usually referred to as the home goods chapter. And this is where tablecloths, bed linens, placemats, all of those kinds of things fall under chapter 63. And there is not a third country origin rule for this chapter, so the products must be completely from lesser developed beneficiary country. You cannot use fabric from India or Pakistan or whatever. There are additional documents that are really important for making a textile industry entry. This is what the visa looks like, and every country will have a visa stamp that looks something like this. And what you need to do is have this stamp put on your invoice. And it'll be held by someone at customs. Sometimes it's a little hard to figure out where to go for this, but generally at the airport or any other port, you will find someone who has this stamp. And it's important, this is very important. I'll give you an example of a wearing apparel company in West Africa that was shipping a lot of goods to the US. And when they arrived, they were denied all AGOA treatment because they didn't have this stamp on the invoice. So it really must be there. A little bit about Botswana and Lesotho. Botswana had a big textile and apparel sector earlier, and this is during the time period when the government provided direct incentives to textile and apparel companies. But once those incentives went away, a lot of the industry relocated to Lesotho. Now Lesotho has one of the largest textile and garment manufacturing industries in sub-Saharan Africa. And 80% of the exports go to the US, and the industry employs 44,000 people. There are a number of known US suppliers that goods are produced for, including Old Navy, Walmart, Levi's, and several others. To summarize, there are many opportunities for using AGOA beyond what is currently being used for. It's difficult to figure out sometimes the requirements and the forms and all of that, but once you can determine that, you can have a big advantage under AGOA, especially for textiles and wearing apparel. Some of the challenges to expanding AGOA exports are the lack of knowledge on the advantages and how the preferences exactly work, and a need for investment in key sectors. This could help with providing value chains for products. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa can accumulate input from multiple countries in order to be eligible. The other big factor is the distance to market and costs. It takes 4 to 6 weeks for sea freight, for example. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. And please feel free to contact me if you have other questions.
Thank you very, very much, Jeanette, for that insightful presentation. We will continue with the next speaker, and maybe let's take questions right at the end of the presentation. The presentation slides will be provided to all participants following the webinar. For now, please, let's keep typing our questions into the chat box and our presenters will handle them later. Please allow me to introduce our next speaker, Andres Saldiers. Andres' experience includes several projects management in Latin America, Southeast Asia, Central America, United States of America, East and Southern Africa, Eastern Europe. Some of these are projects funded by the USAID, German Corporation, this is the GIZ, UK8, and Inter-American Development Bank, among others. Andre is an accomplished social and economic growth expert with a PhD in business administration and 2 masters in international trade. Talk about being an expert in a field. Andre is a former exporter and business owner himself and has 25 years of experience negotiating and managing apparel global sourcing contracts with international buyers. He has also done a lot of work in Africa, supporting governments, private associations, and firms in Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, Kenya, Madagascar, Mauritius, on issues of textile and garment industry development. Andres is currently working with the USA Trade and Investment Hub to facilitate linkages between the Southern Africa textile and apparel suppliers with buyers in the US market. Andres, you are welcome to take us on with your presentation.
Thank you so much. The name of the presentation is very interesting, the good, the bad, and the ugly on what the US buyers want from suppliers. So the purpose will be to understand buyers' mentality when choosing to source apparel from South Africa. Yeah, there are other suppliers in Southeast Asia, Central America, Latin America, Eastern Europe, China, Egypt, and so on and so forth. And the second objective will be to understand a step-by-step process to achieve a buyer's interest in sourcing from Southern Africa. Let me just be very clear that my approach is a business approach. As mentioned from my experience, I've been dealing with contracts, with factories, with labor issues, with shipping issues, with quality audits, with buyers providing technical specifications on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to give you a very business practical approach on how to do business with the US buyers. In that sense, when a buyer is sourcing for a new supplier, they clearly understand that this is a business related to profits. And the profits come from a very simple analysis that I explained throughout this apparel industry cost structure. This is a structure that I've developed myself from over 300 factories in all continents. And they are pretty similar all across the border. And this is what the buyers see in their own vision when they are dealing with a potential new supplier. They do understand that cotton, yarn, and fabric, it's the major component of the garment cost, between 53 to 62%. Labor is between 17 to 20. There are other materials like trimming, washing, 12 to 16%, packaging 3 to 5%, and then it comes the markup of the profit. That range between 10, 15 to get to the export price. What the buyers understand in this portion is that in order to reach a competitive price, you need skilled workers. That means that the sewing processes have to be extremely competitive in terms of efficiency, okay? Reaching an 80% efficiency, I've seen that efficiency in countries like Indonesia, of course, in China. I've seen some in Bangladesh, some in Vietnam, some in Central America like Honduras and Peru. But in majority of factories, the efficiency is between 45 to 65%. So that increases the price. And when the buyer is searching for a new supplier, they try to understand how well versed and how skilled are the labor force to reach that efficiency to control only 17 to 20% of the cost. We'll talk about fabric later on. And then it's the external cost. How much is going to cost to the nearest port, to the destination port, it's been 2 to 5%. And then finally, the AGOA comes into play. That is going to be how much I'm going to be saving against my competitors. In other terms, if China was going to ship a polyester shirt, it will pay 32%, while AGOA, it will pay 0, no duty. You know, so that's where the real deal comes about AGOA. That's the competitive in the end price cost comes into play from a business standpoint. And then the terms on where are you going to deliver the goods. Are you going to deliver exports at your factory? That means that you're not going to take care of your transportation costs and the import duty payment. And of course, if you're going to go more to my warehouse, which is the DDB price, the price that you're going to get is a full price, including all those factors until the end of the chain. Therefore, the final price is the internal price plus the external cost. And the buyer's preference at this point is to receive the goods at their warehouse. That means that the all administrative and the control and the scheduling and the logistics from exporting and moving the cargo from your factory to the warehouse is going to be on the supplier responsibility. They prefer that because they rather spend their time and efforts and their personnel in marketing, in trying to get market share, understanding the trends, rather than having a equipment of labor and logistics teams, broker companies that are going to be taking care of the ports, and if there's a delay, and if the transit time, and if there's any issues during the transportation, they prefer not to worry about that and just receive their goods at the warehouse. So that's number one concept that I want you to understand. What is happening? Why the buyers are switching to that? In the last 20 years, factories and countries were basically providing labor, which is CMT, you know, cat, maid, and trim. And throughout the years, the buyers are starting to say, I don't want only CMT. I want you to do sourcing. I want you to do product development. I want you to understand what the fabric suppliers are. Can you buy my fabric from a nominated supplier? That means that you will have to buy it, but also incur in a financial cost to pay those goods. And that's the concept of full package. Can you provide the entire garment price to me? That means that you're not just a CMT or labor provider. You will take care of the fabric. Now, ideally, the preference of buyers is to deal and negotiate with fully integrated factories. There are several around the world that understand that in order to reach the best competitive prices, they prefer to be vertically integrated. Of course, that it's a huge investment to have the textile portion in addition to the labor portion. And lately, there is a new trend, which is the connecting services, which means that you will be taking care of all the logistics to reach to the manufacturer, to the buyer's warehouse. So as you can see, the vendor becomes a critical partner for buyers and has been progressing from just providing labor to provide full package and connecting services. The question then, in order to be competitive and get the attention of the buyers, is how to control 50% of the cost, which is the fabric. Now, we do understand the majority of countries around the world, especially least developed countries, they don't have an integrated value chain. Okay, like Indonesia. Indonesia doesn't even have cotton, but it's the number 11th exporter in the world. How did they reach that? Because they learned how to control the yarn and fabric supply in terms of quality, in terms of volume, in terms of just-in-time services, and buying from designer suppliers or becoming a full package. I do see great opportunities in South Africa because I've been witness of what I call regional value chain. I've been seeing cotton from Tanzania being shipped to Mauritius. Mauritius is going to need it and send it to Madagascar for cotton sew. I've seen Uganda cotton shipping to Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has already installed textile mills in knitting and woven, and they are producing their own fabric in the region. And that's the most important factor from a buyer to choose a factory is you be able to provide also the fabric. That's a competitive factor in this arena. As far as the buyer, again, close structure, volume, price, and service is a very big factor when choosing a vendor. Labor. Sometimes we believe because we have a humongous amount of labor, very competitive, we think we're competitive, and it's not the truth. Several countries are already offering a very competitive sewing minute cost. You have countries that are doing 0.01 cent per sewing minute, countries that are paying a worker $65 a month. So there are multiple players in Central America, Latin America, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and so on and so forth that are providing labor. So what's the point? The turning point to be a different is to learn how to supply the cloth, even though you don't have the cloth in your investment. Regional value chain is the answer to that. And of course, quality is no longer discussed. You cannot go to a bar and say, I produce good quality. It's a given. You do not discuss quality any longer. If we understand what's going on in the global market, you can see that the major suppliers for North America are coming from the US, Mexican, Canada agreement, the Caribbean Basin Trade and Partnership Act, which is huge, including countries like Haiti, Guatemala, Honduras, and of course in China, which is the largest supplier. In South America, you have ATPDA, which is the similar of AGOA, providing zero import duty for textile and apparel into the US. And of course, you have Africa, not only with the US, but your internal efforts to constitute a free trade agreement. And they have the European Union with GSP benefits for textile apparel. So this is how the world looks like. And let's just see what the US market distribution has as of today. Again, the USMCA allows Mexico to be one of the major partners. 20.7 of US imports coming from Mexico already. As far as the Caribbean Basin, talking about nearshoring, 24 hours, a 40-feet container from Honduras to Miami, it's a big factor. Honduras imports 13.4 of what US buys, Salvador 5.05, Guatemala 3.38, Haiti, new member, 2.3. But in the other side, for Honduras, the textile and apparel is 67% of the GSP, for their internal revenue. So they are textile countries that live out of this industry. China, whenever I hear about China, I start shaking, but it's not going to be for long. China reaches over 33% of what the US market buys. Nevertheless, recent survey, a couple months ago from Gartner, established that the US market imports of over 90 million apparel, and recent industry, the survey, shows that buyers are interested in sourcing 33% out of China by 2023. That means that there are new vendors need. Mexico or Honduras or Salvador are not going to be able to supply that 33% of $90 billion. And that's the opportunity for Africa. Yet China, still a big player. Nevertheless, they have increased their costs in several fronts. The labor cost has become a particular serious issue from Chinese firms. A basic sewing is making $600 a month. That's how expensive is the labor, and that's a factor that we need to take into consideration. But China provides the 50% of the cost, which is the fabric. Again, labor is not the only factor. New sources of supply like Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam are tackling the labor issue, but also moving towards the fabric supply issue. Many buyers will not return to China when safeguard quotas are removed. Greater cost of compliance with growing environmental legislation. Firms wishing to invest are finding it harder to obtain finance as the Chinese authorities have tightened credit in a bid to limit inflation. US trade relations and COVID impact of buyers' ability to source out of China. So there's not only a trade war, but there's also a COVID impact that I will address in a little bit. Despite this, China will remain a significant player in the industry still. As you can see, this has been changing if we analyze the three major suppliers to the US, China being number 1, Vietnam number 2, and Bangladesh number 3. You can see starting 2016, China has been dropping the imports and the rest of the world is growing. That means there's a switch. While China is going down because of the reason I just explained, the rest of the world has huge opportunities to gain that market share. And who are they? We're talking about Jordan, Egypt, Haiti, Peru, Korea, Colombia, Morocco, and they are getting a market share. And they do also have some special treatment on import to the apparel industry. Based on that, understanding there's a huge opportunity to get that market share, what I've been doing in the last 3 years in Africa is bringing buyers to the region pretty successfully. Having buyers like Puma, Jockey, Calvin Klein, Walmart, PVH, G3 Group, Global Sourcing Group, and so on and so forth. How do we get a buyer knowing that there's opportunity? I know there's a great factories in Lesotho, in Eswatini, in Botswana, Namibia. We're working with them now. But what are the steps that we need to take as businessmen to reach a buyer? So I put together a step-by-step so we understand the basic, the fundamentals, and how do we go to the next level. The first one is understanding the market, understand who are the prices, competitors, what's the impact in COVID. Right now, America has been very hardly impacted in the retail industry. Multiple companies have filed Chapter 11, which is bankruptcy, like Victoria's Secrets and J. Crew, and just the stores are not open, and there's an issue on how to recapture the market that's being lost. But at the same token, as things are moving along well, the companies are starting to look again. Of course, they want to be out of China somehow. What is the next step? How do we present to a potential buyer our company? That is a corporate image. How do we present what are the benefits of buying from Africa? This is full marketing, providing concepts like speed to market, very trendy concept right now. Whoever can understand speed to market, which means the faster you get to the shops, the better option you have. While I was in Bolivia, I thought that was impossible to beat China. But when I show my buyers that I can be in 48 hours air freight in New York and charging $3 more on a basic polo shirt, they were shocked because they will be better off having the goods in the stores rather than having 28 days selling from China. So that allowed me to increase my price in $3 and be there in 3 days, so they can have a better cash flow and rotation of inventory and having the product display in the stores rather than in the ocean. So speed to market is a huge factor. Collaborative sourcing, which means understanding what the designers want, private label, and doing Gerber, pattern making, trying to find fabric alternatives and sourcing global value chains and regional value chains and providers. Of course, AGOA is a factor, but it's not the only factor. This is just 17 to 32%, which is huge. But if you don't have the other factors, no matter how zero is the import duty, you won't make it. You have to have the entire concept in your criteria. And the most important one, and this is the factor that I struggle every time I make a call to a potential buyer, the trust factor. They ask me, they are very clear, and they say, why would I give my business to a factory in Africa rather than China that I've been working with, or Central America that I know they're close to us, or Egypt, or Indonesia, or Vietnam, or Bangladesh? What would I do? Would I switch my business from them to you? Do I trust Africa? Can they ship on time? Can they have speed to market? And that's the lack of information. And project like ours is trying to break that concept and going after the buyers and build this trust factor. And you know what? It is possible because several buyers are already trusting Africa and getting their attention to see the continent of Africa. Then you finally have this pursue and present yourself. It's the meeting, you have 5 minutes with the global sourcing decision maker, is the buyer. When you walk into New York, I'll show you a slide. There are 80 buildings. In each one of the buildings, there are 4 buyers in each floor. There are over 5,000 buying offices. And in every company, there is one buyer for children, denim, one buyer for women, woven, one buyer for men, shirts, one buyer for underwear, and so on and so forth. Once you find this global decision maker, you need to pursue and have a 5-minute one-on-one discussion. And that you have one shot only to get their attention. Once you get it, you need to make a quick, effective presentation and the corporate image. And the next step will be, okay, I'm interested. I'm interested in learning more. That's when effective communications can. Virtual introductions, Zoom meetings, timely responses. If the buyer doesn't get an answer within 24 hours, you're done. Because guess what? When I was trying to running my business and I was in those buildings with my bag full of samples in the lobby waiting for the global decision makers were suppliers from Egypt, from Central America, from Indonesia, doing exactly the same I do. And as soon as I made a mistake, they will go to the next supplier. So communication is king. And that needs to be understood by the factories all over the world, especially in Africa. Then you have the sample opportunity. That means that the relation is coming into serious talk. They want a sample, they want a lead time, and they want a quote based on their specification. And if you say you're going to have a sample in 2 weeks, you better have it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks and 1 day, you're out of the business. Then they will provide you a feedback. What is the adjustment on the sample, quick responses, and again, communication. Finally, you quote, once they like the right product, right price, then you negotiate if you're going to ship FOB, LDP, and then you will have a vendor compliance audit. That means they want to make sure that your factory complies with safety regulation, industrial compliance, no children labor force, no fire exits, and proper lighting, ventilation. Most of the major brands will do a physical audit. And I'm sure whoever is working with the Walmart and Calvin Klein been through that already. But not all buyers. Some smaller boutiques, like maybe Linda Richards, going to buy you a container per month. It's not a huge buyer, and they don't need to do that full vendor compliance visit. Nevertheless, they will ask information about you and try to make sure that your factory is in compliance with all these safety factors. Then you have your first order, a pilot and time and action to deliver. They will issue your purchase order. That's the real negotiation and the payment conditions. And the most important and critical factor at the end is production, quality, just in time, due to the market. Once you do your first delivery, you will receive your first reorder. Once you get your first reorder, I always say it, then you have the client on your hand and that you have access and you have loyalty. And as you can see, in any of these 12 steps, any mistake, even though you get to step number 6, but you won't provide the sample on a timely basis, all the other first to 6 steps are done. You are out of the market. So it's very difficult to get there, but once you have them in the hook, you better understand that these steps have to come and you gotta be efficient. As far as how do we market, what kind of buyers are we looking according to our factory capabilities? Either we're gonna go to the high end, which is better prices, excellent quality, fabric development supply there, design and color, and motor volumes. And you have buyers in the middle to lower end. This is more related to competitive pricing, CMT mainly, of course, good quality, larger volumes, some kind of designs and colors, but of course the prices are not as good as the high-end market. As far as the segmentation, you have department stores like Saks and Macy's, higher end, discount stores, Walmart, Target. So many factories in Africa are working with Walmart, and Walmart is not one of my favorites because it's price related. And nevertheless, they gave you the volume. Mass merchandiser like JCPenney, Sears, middle prices, high volumes. Softline, the Gap, J.Crew, Banana Republic, well, J.Crew no longer in business. Banana Republic, they are intense in design and deliveries. Hardlines like Nautica, Nike, Old Navy, more on the higher price end. And then you have the high end, like Polo, Tommy, Jones, DK, and Y. I worked with Polo for over 15 years, and once they choose a factory, they are very loyal and they pay premium price. And of course, you have multiple designers, boutique chains, catalog sales. This is a $90 billion market. There is different buyers that will accommodate to the factory reality. So when we pitch Southern Africa, how do we build a corporate image strategy? We're building marketing tools right now. I've been working with 9 factories that provide me a factory profile. which are fairly competitive. How do we sell the buyers that we are not a buying office? They are scared of buying office as a 10-15% of extra cost. That happens a lot in Southeast Asia. Buying offices are taking 10 to 15% with 10 employees, you know, so they don't want that in the middle. And our project, the Trade Hub, is doing this in order to create economic development and create labor positions. So that's a good pitch from our side, a good factor. A full package service available, that's something important. I believe in the regional value chain. Again, I've seen wonderful factories in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, and of course in Southern Africa. There are companies already. Nevertheless, I only saw one, you know, very established textile mill in Lisaro. Market access condition and transportation lead time, that's another sales pitch. And quicker deliveries, you know, like you were saying, like it was exposed 4 to 6 weeks on ocean freight. It's a long period. But if you have a 6 to 8 weeks quick response time from a purchase order to delivery, that puts you in the front door. And of course, competitive pricing and speed to market. Please always remember, a new buyer is the result of changes in their current suppliers. They are switching. This is, you see in the mind in the center, this is the buyer's mind, okay? What they want profits. They want to increase the sales, all right? So AGOA is one factor that we present. We are a real alternative to Asia and other competitors, for sure. Huge factor, a lot of factories in Africa all over. The concept of collaborative sourcing and service, extremely important that we can provide that. Competitive lead times, quick response programs, response time and communication, effective communication, very important as mentioned. Competitive pricing. And again, pricing is not only about labor related. It's about the concept of service, we'll see. Productivity and efficiency is extremely important. Building good shops and floors that are reaching 70-75% efficiency, that will be ideal. And what is the future sourcing looking like? Right now, we're in the middle of trade war between China for the and the US for the last 2.5 years. And now we have another factor in the business sense, the COVID. There is a sentiment, this has become sentimental for the US buyers. They don't want China. They want something made in somewhere else, and that's a fact in the industry. And as mentioned, the trust factor. All these, if you provide the regional value chain proposition, not just providing a CMT business, but also a value chain, including fabric, that's the buyer's preference. Remember again, the apparel business is not only about products, it's about service to the client, so they can trust their business to the country and the selected factory. Service, service, service. As we move to my closure, please understand that most companies are looking to a diverse sourcing base right now in the industry insights. More companies are using the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement. 65% are using more. 58 companies are using more importing from Central America. And interesting, 50% are using more from AGOA than in the past 2 years. 60.7% of US buyers are currently sourcing from 10 different countries or regions. They did understand that having one single supplier like China was a mistake. They are sourcing to different countries now. The near future, right now, there's a very slow recovery due to COVID, but things looking good in the next couple of years. US companies are feeling cautious and are looking to diversify sourcing. AGOA is underutilized, but companies are beginning to understand the regional value chain and competitive advantages. Some of the buyers that I touch, they don't know about AGOA. So it's a daily process that we have to go through sell the concept. The global consumption of apparel reached 11.4 kilograms per capita. That's globally. Okay, out of that, the highest demand is the US market, 37.6 per capita. That means that every single American buys 37 kilograms of garments per year. Now imagine how much is 37 kilograms. Just weight, jeans, t-shirts, underwear. Their culture is to shop. The Americans get bored and they go to shop. And if they can't shop, they go online. Europe is 31.2 and China 1.8 kilograms per year. As mentioned, trade relations between the US and China have under pressure for 2.5 years, providing good momentum for Africa to enter the US market. China is being replaced by other countries around the world. AGOA countries are gaining trust and reputation, and several major buyers are already in the region. And finally, what success will look like, in my perspective? A vibrant manufacturing sector with an export culture into West, East, and Southern Africa. An enhanced textile industry, adding value to cotton lin, yarn mills, and supplying investment in fabric production for export and local industry. Of course, installing just a knitting factory requires about $15 million. And just installing a CMT factory, you can do with $250,000. So there's a big difference on the investment terms and amount of resources to do. But yet, I believe Africa should look into that concept. Large export-oriented garment factories potentially employing tens of thousands of workers. Many countries kickstarted their cotton, textile, and apparel value chain through the garment export industry. So the CMT, it's the first in the chain to pull out the rest of the chain. Moreover, while you guys have a wonderful cotton in the region, especially from Uganda, especially from Tanzania. Uganda cotton is considered as good as the Egypt cotton, as you know. Once scale is achieved backward, linkage occur naturally. That pulls the investment, the private sector understand there's money into it. And most of the factories around the world started like that with the CMT. And then once the business was growing, they needed to incorporate the rest of the chain into their business schemes. As the industry matures, it moves from CMT to full service package delivery, resulting in additional value add. So if you see that grow from cut pieces to cut mate and trim to free on board, from FOB plus design, landed duty pay, and combination on branding, marketing, retail, and finance while driving a global value chain to deliver the product. That's what success will look like in a continent like Africa. When I mentioned about the 80 buildings in Manhattan, this is a picture of it. This is in the center. As you can see, there's a statue of a sewer from 1945, a Jewish sewer. But what you can see, you see a needle and a button, a giant. It's a statue of the industry. But I want you to focus on that little building that says the Fashion District Information. Information is key to reach those buyers. Each one of these floors, there are hundreds of buyers. We need to find out who is interested in Africa. The market is possible. It's right there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Andre. Thank you. Thank you. We've heard the U.S. market side perspectives on importing into the U.S., covering legal framework and buyers' requirements and processes. Now we will take a peek into regional activities by trade promotion service providers and suppliers themselves. To that effect, I will quickly introduce Nizar Mohammed, who is the sector manager at Trade and Investment KwaZulu-Natal, Trade Invest KZN, and is responsible for the knowledge economies, primarily focusing on fourth industrial revolution and the green economy. Prior to that, Nizar worked for the Provincial Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs with responsibilities for the film and renewable energy sectors. So today, Nizar will be giving us insights into South African manufacturers and their export considerations in the context of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. You're welcome to share those insights with us, Nizar, please.
Okay, thanks very much for that introduction. Just to further elaborate on it, just to give you a brief explanation, I work for a thing called Trade and Investment KZN, and we are an investment promotion agency based in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And part of our job is to attract investment into the province. Another part is to help companies that are in distress, especially now during the pandemic. And finally, we also have an export unit that helps local companies wanting to export throughout the world. And AGOA, obviously, when it was established, was one of the beacons that we looked to assist in that particular endeavor. And this presentation is coming at a particularly good time for us because, well, it's a bad time globally, but a good time because it's forcing us to reconsider how we do exports. I mean, nobody predicted this pandemic. And nobody saw what this pandemic could do, not only to trade, but also to global value chains. And as Trade Investment KZN, probably the first thing that we encountered, around about in February or March, when borders started closing, was companies coming to us to look for alternatives alternative markets to export their product. And so what I'm going to share with you is based, I think, primarily on that experience, but also in terms of what we do as an investment promotion agency. And I don't need to go through the effects of the pandemic. I think people are well aware of that. But this slide will give you some indication of why, as an investment promotion agency, we hold exports in such high regard. And I mean, I think the slide speaks for itself. But as a developing country, exports is particularly important for us, especially when you look at, for instance, the statistic of $1 billion worth of agricultural exports in the USA created almost 6,500 American jobs. Now, that's the sort of stuff we want to in a country, especially where a large proportion of our adult population is unemployed. So we see exports as a way to actually bridge that gap to going from unemployable to employable and to create industries, especially in the SME sector. But we also, when we look at countries like Thailand, we see that, for instance, in 1963, 97% of Thailand's export basket comprised agricultural and mineral products, whereas in 2013, that represented less than 20% of the export basket, and the bulk of Thailand's exports now is in chemicals and machinery. So when AGOA appeared on our doorsteps, it was a boon for us because we saw that as a mechanism to diversify our export basket and also to begin to concentrate on specific markets such as the USA market. This slide gives you some indication of Africa's top exporting countries. It's a bit of a tussle between the 2018 figures and currently as to who's in the #1 spot, but be that as it may, it's either ourselves or Nigeria. But what's interesting, though, from an exporting point of view, is the top 10 African exporters provided about 3/4, just under 75% of all international product sales from Africa. And that level of concentration is not necessarily good if you want the continent as a whole to succeed. If you've only got 10 countries out of the entire continent doing 75% of trade, there's a huge impetus for the other countries to begin to catch up. This slide, which gives you some indication of the trade between the USA and sub-Saharan Africa, you can see in 2018, we were looking at about $41 billion US, which makes the USA Africa's third largest trading partner. However, as I think we are aware, China has supplanted the USA as a trading hub in Africa, and currently the trade with China, between China and sub-Saharan Africa, is 3.5 times more than that which is between sub-Saharan Africa and the USA. And this just provides, in terms of AGOA, this just gives you some indication of where sub-Saharan Africa sits in the US's global export market. Sorry, I just went back there. So we basically contribute 1.1% of total US goods imports. And this is what it comprises. Again, South Africa, Nigeria, very little difference between the two. Angola, the Ivory Coast, and Botswana, that makes up the sort of top 5 African countries. And you can see the amount that we produce as a continent, or rather sub-Saharan Africa. It's about 1% or 1.5% of total US global imports. So there is a long way to go before we can start competing as a unit, as a block, or even as a continent in terms of the USA market and supplanting some of the other clients that are trading with the USA. When we look at South Africa, you can see that the picture between our imports and exports hasn't changed that significantly. And this statistic I got, interestingly enough, at the start of the pandemic. So from an export point of view, about 10.5% of our exports goes to China, just under 10% goes to Germany, 7% goes to the USA, and it's more or less correlates with what goes on from an importing point of view. And now, how has AGOA benefited South Africa, and why is it something that we've been pursuing so aggressively and want to make the most of and capitalize it until its termination in 2025? So I'll just read through some of the statistics for you. If you take the Western Cape, which is the heart of the citrus industry, and since its inception, AGOA has supported close to 85,000 jobs. Now, when you consider that we are looking here primarily at seasonal employment, and we're trying to move it from seasonal to permanent, 85,000 jobs that's been supported by one trade regime is quite significant in a country such as South Africa. Also, you look at, for instance, things like BMW 3 Series, the bulk of that which is made in South Africa is sold in the USA. So that's a boon for our auto sector. And just to take this even further, again, looking at the trade relationship between South Africa and the USA, over the last 15 years, that's the length of AGOA's lifespan, total trade between the two countries has nearly doubled. Now, this is the point I made at the start of the presentation, where I said, before AGOA, South Africa's export basket was very similar to that of Thailand. We primarily exported minerals and metals to the USA. But since AGOA, what we've seen is an increase in the export of platinum, aluminium, steel, vehicles, wine, beer, fresh and processed fruits and vegetables, and also essential oils. Now, that's the sort of basket that makes a developing country grow. If you're only exporting one or two things to one particular global superpower, it makes you quite weak and quite vulnerable, especially when things change. However, if you have a diversified export basket, such as the one that we've had as a result of AGOA, it gives you more clout in the global marketplace. And that is something that we are striving for. I must say, not only with our relationships with the USA and AGOA, but also with the Chinese, also with the EU, our big trading partners, as it were. Now, when we got the invitation for this particular webinar, we looked at, I think that there were a set of questions that we were asked to answer. And this is one of the things that we looked at. And the answers were by and large as a result of two processes. The one is, when the pandemic started, we conducted surveys with some of our companies to see what are the things that they would want going forward. And we've also been quite keen visitors to the USA over the last decade and a half as a result of the AGOA agreement. And this is the feedback that we're getting from a lot of the companies that have actually gone to the USA, highlighted their products in some of the trade fairs, and also been able to establish markets there. And I'll just focus on a few of them. The first one that we are finding quite interesting is the whole issue of going green. So a lot of the companies that we are dealing with are saying that there's an emphasis globally on the carbon footprint. So the days of just exporting and not wondering, the carbon basis of your particular product is over. And that is as important in the US as in the EU market. So we are finding this tendency by a lot of our companies to begin to minimize their carbon footprint as a way to get the necessary buy-in to penetrate the US market. The other is also innovation. And here we've been quite fortunate, because not only have we seen some sort of correlation between penetration of the first world, but also an uptake in 4IR technologies in Southern Africa, where they're using these technologies, especially in the clothing and textile industry, to begin to provide a new service for some of the products that they're looking at sending abroad. And here you're looking at products that are treated to prevent staining or color fading. And in KwaZulu-Natal, which up until recently was the home of a fair amount of textile companies, we're beginning to see them beginning to play around with these sorts of ideas as a way to penetrate these markets. The other thing that we found of particular usefulness is the exclusivity of some South African designs, especially with regards to the fabrics that are produced in parts of South Africa, like the shweshwe. And where we've seen that has been its marriage between the exclusivity of a South African fabric together with the cultural imagery and colors that we are beginning to see become synonymous with the process of KwaZulu-Natal. And for those of you who are aware, KwaZulu-Natal prides itself on two things. It's been the kingdom of the Zulu on the one hand, but it's also one of the trade gateways from an export point of view, because we've got two harbors and an airport that all are focusing, and two SEZs that are all focusing on exporting and taking product out of the country. So you marry that with the whole exclusivity of some of the fabrics that we are trying to sell, and it would appear that we're onto a winning ticket there in terms of sending stuff abroad. Some of the lessons that we've learned, and this has been a steep learning curve for us, and I've been involved at a very minimal level with some of this, but in some of the workshops that I've attended, we've seen companies, especially the smaller companies, the ones that are entering the USA for the first time, being struck with these issues that they need to deal with. The first, obviously, is white label manufacturing, and that's local companies being prepared to manufacture under the buyer's label. Now, that may be something that they may want to consider, but there's the long-term legal implications of something like this that they need to take care of. And it's events such as this that we think will help local manufacturers to understand what the implications of white label manufacturing are. And then also the alignment to local brands, which we are beginning to see as playing an increasingly large role in local companies wanting to establish themselves abroad, especially in the AGOA marketplace. And just to end off, now we know that there's talk of AGOA ending in 2025. And so obviously, based on what's happened now with the pandemic, we've had to reconsider and look at what are our options, both from an investment promotion agency's point of view, but also from the advice that we can give to companies that are considering a changed landscape in post-2025. And the pandemic has helped us focus this, and we've been quite fortunate in the fact that we've got a relationship with Northwest University, and they've developed a thing called the Decision Support Matrix, which has begun to look at the various filters, using various filters, showing us how various markets can be penetrated, what are the sort of the things that we would need to look out for, and how can we begin to look at the very same things that Andreas spoke about in his presentation earlier. And it's utilizing that we are beginning to look at alternatives, for instance, to the Chinese market, possibly alternatives also to the USA market once AGOA ends, or once we lose some of the preferential agreements around it. And what's been quite interesting is how these debates have affected in the companies in KwaZulu-Natal, mainly because they have now been, to some extent, burnt by this pandemic. They've seen borders close, they've seen harbors close, and they've seen products dying, and they need to find an alternative to that. So we've used the lessons that have been learned from this pandemic, and we are going to use those lessons to help us just navigate the next 3 or 4 years to see how we can capacitate companies as they begin to navigate a post-COVID and a post-AGOA landscape. And these are some of the things that we are beginning to deal with. So the first thing, obviously, is China supplanted the USA in the African market. And there's been huge changes to the domestic economy in the USA as well that we need to take cognizance of. And a lot of agreements, such as the ones that we're dealing with now, is moving away from aid-based to trade-based. And with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we are now going to be part of probably one of the biggest trading blocks in the world, which will give us some clout. So when a country wants to have a bilateral agreement with 1 or 2 countries in Africa, if we're part of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we could actually go with what the AU is possibly looking at. And that's rather having agreements between, for instance, the US and the whole of Africa, or the EU and the whole of Africa, rather than having individual agreements with individual countries in South Africa, in Africa. And I was just shared some of these things with you just as a way to have a debate in terms of the sorts of things that local companies are dealing with in South Africa and in KwaZulu-Natal in particular. And we are under no illusions. A vaccine may be found quite soon, but things will get better before they will get worse before they get better. And companies are going to want to find answers fairly quickly for new markets that they want to penetrate, be they the USA through AGOA, or the EU, or other particular markets. And it's going to be the experiences that we are getting in our dealings currently with AGOA that we are hoping we could pass on to the companies that we're dealing with. So with those short few words, I hope I've given you some indication of what trading with KwaZulu-Natal is like and the sorts of issues that we are grappling with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nizar. As a trade and investment promotion professional myself, and having worked with TIPA, a trade and investment promotion agency, I can fully relate with your presentation and the role played by these TIPAs in facilitating and promoting investment and trade as 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So really looking forward to further interactions.
On behalf of All Fashion Sourcing and USA Trade Hub, a big thank you, guys, for joining us today.